Monster tamers are dead, and Nintendo was the one that killed them. Accidentally. When you hear the name Monster Tamer, your mind likely jumps to Pokémon. And I don't blame you. It's the one single game that dominates the entire genre, but then also happens to be one of the most profitable IPs to ever exist. That isn't for no reason. Cause I mean, you gotta admit, this is cool. Watching this dude pull up genetically changes something you do at 7. If you're slightly more into it, you might think of something like Digimon, or more recently something like Palworld, but as enjoyable as it is for us to enter a Steve Irwin arc, they suffer from one major issue. They're dying. And there are a couple of issues as to why. Starting with the outlook on the entire genre. Part of the reason the Monster Tamer genre isn't really recognized as its own genre is because it's almost completely dominated by Pokémon. Everything that comes out inevitably gets compared to it. Temtem, it's Pokémon. Monster Rancher, also Pokémon. Palworld, it's Pokémon, but with guns. Now, to be fair, there are some games that definitely do earn that comparison, but the stereotype appears long before anyone actually plays these sorts of games. Anything where you can catch and trade a creature immediately gets labeled as Pokémon, even in games where that comparison barely makes any sense. Take Yokai Watch for example. When that game released, it was instantly branded as a Pokémon clone, but if you actually play the game, you realize pretty quickly that catching yokai isn't even the main mechanic. In the game, yokai are just spirits that roam around freely in the human world that cause minor inconveniences. Though they are invisible, their presence does affect humans, like Happy Air just randomly making you happy, or Ruffraff who normally makes well-behaved people crabby. The goal of the game isn't exactly to catch the yokai, so much as it is to just quell them so that they just stop messing with the humans, bringing it closer to something like Pokémon Ranger than a traditional monster tamer. Heck, unlike Pokemon, you have to convince these guys to come with you versus Pokemon where you just beat the snot out of them and then just trap them in a ball. The systems are completely different, but that doesn't matter because Pokemon is the most obvious comparison that players have. And that comparison becomes a problem the moment marketing comes into play. You've probably heard those gigantic marketing promises before. We are the Call of Duty killer. We are the League of Legends killer. And it's like, just stop. Please stop. It never works. The problem with this strategy is that it defines your entire game's existence as the antithesis of something that already exists. The game with millions of players, with decades of development behind it. Instead of standing on its own, your entire identity becomes X thing that replaces Y. Which means every design decision you make immediately gets judged up against it. Your monsters get compared to Pokemon, your combat gets compared to Pokemon, your world building gets compared to Pokemon. But at that point, the conversation always ends up circling back to the same question. Why wouldn't I just play Pokemon? That sort of a trap isn't unique to Monster Tamers either, because it actually happened with Yooka-Laylee. The game marketed itself as being the spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, a certified hood classic from the Nintendo 64 era, back when Rare was dropping hits like Donkey Kong Country. Now, Yooka-Laylee wasn't even that bad a game, but it did have a single major problem. It could never really be its own thing, because from the moment it was announced, it was defined as Banjo-Kazooie, but modern. So no matter what it did, it always ended up living in the shadow of its original bigger brother. Always compared, always measured, always the younger sibling, giving major sidekick energy but not even the lovable kind. And Monster Tamers fall into that exact same trap. They end up boxed into being Pokemon but with X mechanic. And once you put yourself in that role, you're no longer your own game, you're just a result of whatever Pokemon didn't do. And speaking of boxing themselves in, that leads directly into the next issue. Monster Tamers rarely innovate on the original formula. This is more of a subtle problem because we don't always notice it happening, but once a single game becomes the definitive king of a genre, everyone else starts trying to copy it. Nobody wants to take the risk of doing something different. Nobody wants to go too far outside the model that's already proven to work. So instead, we just get variations. Different creature designs, different story beats, but the underlying structure almost never changes. Catch monster, level monster, battle bigger monster. But because of this, almost every single one pigeonholes themselves into being a turn-based RPG. And to be fair, there is a reason for that. RPG systems communicate progression really well. As your stats improve, your creature gets stronger, and you can directly see how far you come because it gives you a direct numerical representation. But because developers keep boxing themselves into that structure, there's very little room for innovation outside of what's already acceptable in an RPG setting. Like Pokemon Legends Arceus showed how fun it could be to integrate action mechanics directly into the monster battles. Palworld even leaned further into open world survival systems, giving you closer to something like a Minecraft gameplay loop. And suddenly you weren't just standing on the sidelines while your monsters fought. You felt like you were a part of the action. But most of these games don't really decide to go that far, because building an action-based combat system is a lot harder than building a turn-based one. Because turn-based ones are more just mathematical representations, turn-based systems are easily predictable and thus easier to balance. And the result of doing that is that most monster tamers end up feeling the same. Different creatures with different names, but the same core experience. And that leads into the next major problem. Because even if someone wanted to break out of that formula, there's another massive barrier standing in the way. Monster tamers live and die by their creatures. Which makes sense. Why would anyone play a game about collecting animals that they don't care about? Because I mean, very few game genres can make you care about a bunch of ones and zeros like your Pokemon deciding to not be paralyzed because they love you. Every creature has to be designed with love, care, and compassion, with the idea that it's going to be somebody's favorite. But that expectation creates a massive development problem. Right now, the industry standard for a monster tamer is to launch with around 100 different monsters and creatures. That's just become the natural baseline since the Gen 1 Pokemon games blew up with the original 151. And you probably didn't really need me to tell you, but that's a whole lot of work. Every creature needs a design, animations, abilities, balancing, evolution systems, things that give you that linear sort of growth curve, all before you even get into the rest of the game. But then here's the real kicker. If you're already putting in the effort to design 100 different monsters, why not just make a regular RPG instead? A traditional RPG might only need like 40 or 50 enemy designs to feel like a complete experience. You could spend the extra time building stronger characters, a better story, more compelling gameplay systems, and then just include the monster taming as a side mechanic. Players who enjoy story still get that full RPG experience, and players who enjoy collecting monsters still get the creatures that they came for. And most importantly, you avoid locking yourself into that direct comparison with Pokemon, because at the end of the day, Pokemon has been telling the same basic story for almost 30 years. Meaning that there are only going to be two ways to tell most of them apart. Option 1 is that you just don't tell a story at all. Just plop you straight into the game and then hope you figure it out. Hope that the core gameplay loop is just so compelling that you want to continue playing. Or getting you to care about the world around you and how that interacts with the monsters you're with. Investing you in the story over the battle and underlying mechanics. I don't say this because I just dislike Pokemon, or because I dislike it being basically the only entity in the space. It's actually the opposite. It's because it's such a niche genre of game that basically stagnates because no one sees a feasible reason to make a new one. I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels like the latest ones start to feel like they're just lacking. Like they're missing that bit of magic that made them feel like you were actually on an adventure. Maybe it was the jump from 2D to 3D. Maybe it was because of that lack of environmental design? Could it be that no one feels like they can compete without at least matching every other mechanic they see? It just gets stale after a while seeing the same game over and over.